The morning had the kind of gray stillness that makes everything feel quieter than usual, like the world itself was holding its breath. I had just gotten back from an overnight shift, keys in one hand and my phone buzzing with unread messages in the other, when I noticed the package on the floor outside my door. At first, I didn't think twice. Packages were always being delivered to the wrong apartment. It was a regular occurrence in our old building, with its half-broken mailboxes and distracted delivery drivers. I leaned down to pick it up, expecting it to have my name on it, but the black marker across the label read, "Hers, Miranda, Apartment 2B, my downstairs neighbor." I stood there for a second, holding the box awkwardly, the cardboard slightly damp from the early morning dew. I knew I should have just dropped it by her door and gone inside. I was tired, hungry, and craving a shower, but something stopped me. The edge of the lid was unsealed, just a little, like it had been jostled open during delivery. There was a small gap, barely noticeable, but enough to reveal a glimpse of what was inside. I didn't mean to look. I truly didn't. But my fingers moved almost of their own accord, slipping beneath the loosened flap and pulling it back a few inches. What I saw inside made me freeze. Black lace. Not just any lace, but the kind that looked expensive, delicate, and specifically designed to be seen and removed. My eyes widened as I realized it wasn't just lingerie. It was something far more curated. There was a pair of lacy panties folded next to a strappy bra with silver buckles, a garter belt adorned with tiny beads, and a silk blindfold nestled neatly on top. The textures were all different: mesh, leather, velvet ribbon, and together they formed an aesthetic that felt almost ritualistic. There was more. Beneath the fabric lay a coiled leather flogger, sleek and polished, the ends tied off neatly as if for presentation. A small glass bottle of scented oil had leaked slightly, soaking one corner of the tissue paper and releasing a warm, musky aroma that drifted into the air. It smelled like amber and something else, something floral but heavy, intoxicating. At the bottom of the box was a small cream envelope sealed with red wax. The seal had been broken, the flap hanging open. Curiosity burned hotter than my guilt. I reached in, hand trembling slightly, and pulled out the card. The paper was thick, textured. It felt expensive in my hands. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, almost calligraphic. Just one line: "For those who are ready to see themselves." That was it. No name, no signature. I stared at the words for what felt like minutes, heart pounding as if I'd done something unforgivable. My breath caught in my throat. Something about the message felt targeted, personal, like it had found me rather than the other way around. I slipped the card back in the envelope and dropped it into the box, suddenly ashamed of myself. I knelt there in the hallway, the box still open, hands hovering over it like I didn't know what to do. I felt exposed, like someone had caught me in the act, even though the hallway was empty, even though no one had seen me. But it wasn't just embarrassment, it was something else, a feeling low in my stomach that I couldn't name. I tried to push the flaps back into place, to make it look like I hadn't touched anything, but the lid refused to lie flat. I stood, balancing the box against my hip, suddenly aware of every sound in the building. The creak of a stair, the hum of a distant radio. My skin prickled. I wanted to get inside and lock the door behind me. I wanted to forget what I saw. But as I turned toward my apartment, I heard a sound that made me stop in my tracks. The soft click of a door opening downstairs. I didn't have to look. I knew it was her. My palms began to sweat. The box was still in my hands, still ajar, the scent of the oil stronger now, almost dizzying. I hesitated, my heart thudding in my chest. For a wild second, I considered rushing back down, pretending I had just picked it up, pretending I hadn't looked inside, hadn't breathed it in, hadn't felt that spark of something unfamiliar. But my feet didn't move. I stood frozen, caught between the truth and the lie, between what I had done and what I wished I could undo. The hallway felt narrower somehow, the walls closer. I slowly stepped backward into my apartment, closing the door with the softest click I could manage. I leaned against it, the package still in my arms, its weight growing heavier with every passing second. I didn't look through the peephole. I didn't want to see her face. I carried the box into the kitchen and placed it on the counter. My hands shook as I stepped back. I didn't open it again, not that day, but I didn't seal it either. I left it there like a presence, something unspeakable but real. Hours passed. I tried to sleep but couldn't. The image of black lace pressed against pale tissue paper haunted me. The card's message echoed in my head like a whisper I couldn't silence. For those who are ready to see themselves. I didn't know what it meant, not really, but I knew it was true. Somehow, in a way I didn't understand yet, that box hadn't just been delivered to the wrong door. It had found the right one. It was just after 9 when I heard the knock. A single, deliberate sound against the door, neither tentative nor urgent. I froze where I stood, barefoot in the kitchen, still in the oversized hoodie I hadn't taken off all day. The box sat where I had left it, untouched on the counter, its contents hidden once again, but impossible to forget. My breath hitched as I stepped toward the door. I didn't look through the peephole. I already knew who it was. When I opened it, she was standing there exactly as I had imagined and somehow entirely different. Miranda, my neighbor, the woman I had nodded to for months in the stairwell, exchanged awkward mailroom smiles with, overheard talking softly on the phone through paper-thin walls. She was older than me, but the kind of older that didn't feel like age, more like gravity. She had presence, a stillness that made the space around her feel altered. Her hair was damp, pulled loosely back, and she wore nothing but a black satin robe that clung to her shoulders and parted slightly at the collarbone. The fabric shimmered faintly in the low hallway light. Her skin was bare beneath it. I could feel that truth even before I let my eyes drop. She didn't smile. She didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who had been waiting for the moment to arrive, and now that it had, she simply stepped into it. I moved aside, and she walked past me without hesitation, her bare feet silent on the hardwood. The air shifted in her wake. She moved with intention, as if she belonged here, as if my apartment wasn't new to her at all. She went straight to the kitchen, to the box, and stood in front of it. I followed behind her, unsure of what to do with my arms, my breath, my entire body. She turned toward me, her eyes lingering for a moment too long, and then she placed one hand gently on the edge of the counter. I stood on the other side like we were negotiating the terms of something unspeakable. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was watchful. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the old wall clock, the distant sound of someone's television through the floor. But everything in me was focused on her. She didn't ask if I had opened the box. She didn't need to. There was a knowing in the way she looked at me, a softness that somehow felt more intimate than accusation. Her gaze moved from my face to my shoulder, down my arm, lingering on the edge of the hoodie sleeve, as if she could see straight through the fabric to the thoughts flickering beneath my skin. I felt exposed in a way I hadn't anticipated, not embarrassed, more like stripped bare, as though she had found the part of me I kept buried even from myself. She moved around the counter slowly, crossing the small space between us with the kind of calm that made everything else still. When she stood in front of me, her presence filled the room. She reached out and lifted the edge of the hoodie's collar with 2 fingers, her touch feather-light but undeniable. My skin reacted instantly, goosebumps rising beneath the cotton. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her eyes did all the speaking. They weren't hungry or desperate. They were curious, assured, like she already understood something I hadn't even begun to articulate. I couldn't hold her gaze. It was too much, too steady. I looked down at the floor, at her feet, at the pale skin of her legs disappearing beneath the dark line of her robe. There was something hypnotic about the simplicity of it all. She didn't demand anything from me. She wasn't testing me. She was just there, undeniable, rooted, watching. I felt myself unraveling, thread by thread. She moved past me again, this time slower, and the scent of her brushed against my face. It was the same as the oil from the box, amber, spice, something floral and hard to name. I inhaled too deeply without meaning to, and when she paused behind me, I could feel the heat of her body close to mine. Not touching, but close enough that I could feel my pulse in places I didn't know could pulse. My jaw, my wrists, the space just behind my knees. When she left, it was as quietly as she had come. No words, no glance back, just the soft click of the door and the sudden hollowness that filled the room in her absence. I stood frozen for a long time, listening to the silence stretch around me. My heart was still pounding, not out of fear, but anticipation. A low, curling ache had begun in my stomach, moving outward, blooming along the insides of my thighs. I didn't move, I didn't speak. I just stood there, trying to catch up to something that had already taken hold of me. Later, when I sat on the edge of my bed and replayed every detail of her visit, I realized she hadn't touched the box. She hadn't needed to. The message had already been delivered, not through words or gestures, but through the quiet permission in her eyes. The offer had been made, and it was up to me whether or not to accept it, but I already knew the answer. I felt it in the way my skin still tingled, in the way my breath caught every time I thought about her fingers brushing my hoodie. I felt it in the ache that settled low and deep, in the space where her body had almost touched mine. Something had shifted in me, something irreversible, and I knew with a clarity I couldn't explain that the next time she knocked, I wouldn't hesitate. I would open the door, and I would let her in. The night was thick with the kind of silence that makes even the smallest sounds seem louder, sharper, more deliberate. Outside, the streetlights cast long shadows across the living room floor, carving the darkness into soft golden lines. I had turned off every lamp in the apartment, drawn the curtains, and lit a single candle on the coffee table, telling myself it was just for atmosphere, just to soften the space. But that was a lie. The truth was, I couldn't bear the harsh overhead lights, the clinical brightness that would make everything feel too exposed. I needed the darkness, the half-light, the blur between real and imagined. I had spent the day in a state of simmering tension, going through the motions of normalcy while my mind kept looping back to her. The way she moved through my apartment like she had always belonged there, the way her eyes had met mine without apology, the ghost of her fingers on the fabric near my neck. Nothing she had done was overt, nothing had been said, but I felt branded by her presence, marked in places no one could see. That sensation had stayed with me all day, clinging to my skin like the memory of heat. I tried distracting myself. I vacuumed, I folded laundry, I washed dishes that didn't need washing. I opened a book, then closed it after reading the same sentence 5 times. I scrolled through social media, but every image seemed flat, unreal, like a wall I couldn't break through. I was vibrating under my own skin, restlessness settling into every muscle like static. Her scent was still in the air, a mixture of spice and something floral, haunting the fabric of my hoodie, my sheets, my hair. I wanted to scrub it off, and I wanted to bury myself in it. Eventually, I went to the bathroom, stripped slowly, and stepped into the shower. I turned the water up as hot as I could stand, letting the steam curl around me, my body flushed and aching. I closed my eyes and leaned into the tiled wall, letting the water drum down over my shoulders and back. At first, it was just about relief. The heat softened me, loosened the tight coil in my chest. But then she returned, her image, her presence, slipping behind my eyelids as if summoned by the very heat I had hoped would erase her. I imagined her stepping into the shower with me, moving behind me, her hands sliding over my hips, her mouth grazing the curve of my neck. I could almost feel it, the weight of her breasts pressed against my back, the whisper of breath just behind my ear. My thighs tensed, my breath hitched. I reached for the bar of soap, but my hand trembled, slippery with water and want. I set it aside and let my hand move lower, guided not by impulse, but by something far older, far deeper. My fingers traced the curve of my stomach, the inside of my thigh. I moved slowly, deliberately, eyes still closed, imagining her watching me, touching me. I imagined her kneeling in front of me, lips parted, eyes dark with hunger. I imagined the sound of her voice, low and warm, as she urged me on. My knees nearly buckled as my fingers found the rhythm my body had been craving all day. It wasn't just about release, it was about surrender, about letting go of the control I had been gripping so tightly since the moment I opened that box. When it came, it wasn't sharp or sudden. It was a wave that built and built, crashing over me in a hot, aching rush. My mouth fell open in a soundless gasp. My other hand braced against the wall as I rode it out, the steam curling around my body like breath. I stood there for a long time after, chest rising and falling, heart thudding in my throat. My legs trembled as I turned off the water, stepping carefully out onto the cool tile floor. I wrapped myself in a towel and padded to the bedroom, still warm, still damp, still haunted. I didn't bother getting dressed. I pulled the towel away and dropped it to the floor, letting the night air lick at my skin as I slid beneath the sheets. My body ached in the sweetest way, loosened, tender, raw. I curled onto my side and stared at the wall, the faint flicker of candlelight casting moving shadows across the ceiling. I didn't feel ashamed. I didn't feel guilty. I felt like I had opened a door I hadn't known existed, and now I was standing in the threshold, waiting for her to walk through. Sleep came slowly, curling in at the edges like mist. My thoughts blurred, dissolving into the folds of dreams. She was there again, as I knew she would be, not as a ghost, but as a presence, warm and solid. In the dream, she stood at the foot of my bed, wearing nothing but that robe, open, her body lit by some invisible fire. She reached for me. I woke with her name caught in my throat. The room was quiet. The candle burned low. I lay there with one hand resting over my heart, the other trailing across my stomach, fingers ghosting over the skin still buzzing from imagined touch. The sheets were tangled around my legs. My hair stuck to my neck. But I didn't move. I didn't want to. I wanted to stay in that space just a little longer, in the afterglow of something not quite real, but somehow more honest than anything I'd known in a long time. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, the branches tapping softly against the window pane, like fingers tracing glass. The night didn't speak, but it pressed close, as if holding me in place. and somewhere beneath all the noise in my head, one thought pulsed, steady and quiet, undeniable in its truth. I wanted her. Not just her touch, not just her body. I wanted the part of her that looked at me like she already knew who I was underneath all the fear. I wanted whatever this was becoming, even if I didn't have the words for it yet, even if I wasn't ready, especially because I wasn't ready. The envelope was thin and pale, tucked neatly against the inside of my front door like a secret too delicate to knock. I didn't notice it until the late afternoon when I returned from the grocery store, my arms full of things I didn't need. Fresh fruit, tea I would forget to drink, a bottle of wine I had no intention of sharing. I bent down slowly, heart already thudding with a strange kind of recognition, as if my body knew what it was before my eyes did. There was no name on the front, no handwriting, no seal, just the weightless implication of it resting in weight. I brought it inside and set the bags down on the floor without bothering to unpack them. The apartment was dim with that soft golden light that arrives before sunset, casting everything in a warm haze that made the room feel suspended in amber. I held the envelope in my hand, tracing the edge with my thumb, the paper smooth and cool against my skin. Something about it felt ceremonial, like a beginning disguised as something small. I peeled it open carefully, not out of fear, but reverence. Inside, a single brass key clinked against the paper. Alongside it, a note, just one line, printed in clean serif typeface on thick ivory cardstock. If you want to know, come in. I don't lock the door. My breath caught. The key was old, heavier than expected. I turned it over in my palm, watching how it caught the light. It didn't say which door. It didn't need to. I stood in the center of my apartment, the note still trembling slightly in my fingers, and I felt everything shift inside me. The decision had already been made. Not in words, not in thought, but in the heat between my legs that had refused to leave since that night, in the way I hadn't been able to stop imagining her fingers, her voice, her mouth. I didn't pause to question whether this was a game. It didn't feel like a game. It felt like something older, something waiting. I left the groceries on the floor. I walked to the bedroom and pulled open the drawer where I kept the things I never showed anyone. Thin silk, soft lace, fabric that clung and exposed. I hesitated, then chose the simplest slip I owned. Deep green, low at the back, high at the thigh. I slid it over my skin slowly, savoring the feel of it, how it hugged the curve of my hips, how my nipples tightened beneath the fabric. I didn't wear underwear. I didn't need to. I brushed my hair back and let it fall around my shoulders. My hands were shaking. I didn't take my phone. I didn't lock my own door. I slipped the brass key into the small pocket sewn into the side seam of my slip and descended the stairs barefoot, each step an act of quiet surrender. The hallway smelled faintly of rain and incense. My footfalls were silent on the old wood, my pulse louder than anything around me. When I reached her door, I stood there for a moment, heart thrumming like a bird caught behind glass. I listened. Nothing. But the silence didn't feel empty. It felt expectant. I reached for the handle, my fingers closing around it gently. It turned. The door opened without a sound. The room beyond was lit entirely by candlelight. Hundreds of tiny flames flickered in alcoves, on shelves along the windowsill. The scent hit me first, deep and sweet, like sandalwood and something darker. The air was warm and still, heavy with perfume and intention. She stood near the window, back to me, wrapped in something sheer and black that moved like smoke when she turned. Her gaze found mine immediately. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She stepped aside, leaving space for me to enter. I stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me on its own, or maybe she had moved. I couldn't be sure. Everything in me was buzzing, my skin, my blood, my breath. She moved toward me slowly, with that same certainty she always carried, the kind that made me feel both exposed and seen. I didn't reach for her. I didn't move. I let her close the distance, let her fingertips brush my collarbone, her knuckles trail down the side of my arm. My skin erupted in goosebumps. Her touch was gentle, exploratory, like she was reading me. I stood still, heart hammering, lips slightly parted. She circled me once, her fingers grazing the bare skin of my back, the dip of my waist. Her nails scraped softly down the length of my spine, and I shivered. She stopped in front of me again, and her hand lifted slowly to my cheek. She held me there, her thumb brushing once across my lips. My body swayed toward her, and I didn't stop it. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't need to. Every inch of my body was already answering yes. She leaned in, and I smelled her breath, warm, laced with wine and something sweet. Her mouth met mine softly at first, like she was testing the shape of me, tasting intention. I melted. I felt my knees bend, my hand reaching instinctively for her waist to steady myself. Her kiss deepened slowly, and I let go of whatever part of me had been holding back. My arm slid around her, feeling the heat beneath the silk of her robe, the tension in her muscles, the steadiness in her breath. She pulled me toward the center of the room, where a wide velvet chaise sat surrounded by flickering candles. She sat first, legs parted, and pulled me into the space between them. My knees hit the edge of the cushion, and I folded into her lap, straddling her, the slip riding up my thighs. Her hands cupped the backs of my thighs, guiding me forward. My body moved instinctively, grinding softly against her, meeting more. Her lips found my neck, and my head fell back, a low sound escaping me that didn't even feel like mine. Her fingers slid beneath the slip, palms grazing the bare curve of my ass, and I arched into her. My breath was ragged, my hips rocked. I felt her mouth move lower, her teat scraping lightly across the edge of my collarbone, and then her tongue, slow and deliberate, painting a line across my skin. I moaned, shameless, drowning in sensation. My body was molten, pulsing, pleading. She laid me down across the chaise, her hands never leaving my skin, her body pressed close but not crushing. She took her time. Every movement was deliberate, reverent. I felt like I was being worshipped. She whispered something against my skin I couldn't understand, but it didn't matter. My hands tangled in her hair as her mouth moved lower, her tongue tracing circles along the underside of my breast, her teeth grazing gently before sucking the soft flesh into her mouth. My back arched, my breath caught. Her hands were everywhere, coaxing, guiding, knowing. When her mouth finally moved between my legs, I thought I might unravel completely. She licked slowly, like she was savoring something she'd waited a long time to taste. My thighs trembled around her, my hands clutching the cushion, my voice breaking in the low candlelight. It wasn't just sex, it wasn't just pleasure. It was invocation. It was awakening. When it was over, I collapsed into her arms, my body shaking, my skin slick with sweat and surrender. She held me like I was something precious, something fragile and wild. Her breath slowed against my shoulder. I curled into her chest and closed my eyes, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, maybe years, I didn't feel like I was alone. I felt claimed, owned, chosen. The morning after felt like stepping out of one world and trying to walk in another, as if my body remembered something my mind hadn't yet processed. The sheets still carried her scent, her warmth, the weight of her breath where she had fallen asleep beside me. But when I woke up, the space beside me was empty. The candles had long since burned out, wax pooled and hardened in soft edges along the floor, the corners of the room still glowing faintly from the first light of dawn. The silence was different now. Not absence, but intention. She hadn't disappeared. She had given me space, and in that space, something had been left behind. It sat at the foot of the bed, a box, smaller than the one I had opened days before, but wrapped with the same care, a single ribbon tied in a perfect knot. No card this time, no note, just the box, waiting. I sat up slowly, the cool air wrapping around my skin as the silk slip fell loose across my shoulders. My hands hesitated over the ribbon for a moment, fingertips tingling with the familiar rush of anticipation, fear, desire. Then I pulled. The knot came undone with the softest sound, like a breath being released. I lifted the lid. Inside was a single object, a choker. Black velvet, simple and elegant, with a silver ring at the center and a clasp at the back that glinted in the morning light. It looked delicate, but when I lifted it, I felt its weight, just enough to remind me that it wasn't jewelry in the traditional sense. It was a symbol, a token, a silent declaration. The velvet was cool against my palm, the ring resting heavily between my fingers. I imagined what it would feel like pressed against my throat, snug, secure, seen. Beneath it, carefully folded, was a new slip, pale ivory, thinner than the one I wore, barely there. I ran my fingers over the fabric and felt a jolt of heat move through my core. It was almost translucent, with lace at the edges and two delicate straps that felt more ornamental than functional. It wasn't designed to hide anything. It was made to be noticed, to be unwrapped. And suddenly, I understood. This was not just a gift, it was a summons. I stood, letting the green slip fall to the floor, and reached for the new one. As I pulled it over my body, it clung in ways that felt intentional, outlining every curve, every hollow. I caught sight of myself in the mirror across the room and froze. The woman staring back wasn't me, not the me I had been. She was softer, darker around the edges, her skin glowing, marked with the memory of touch. Her eyes didn't flicker with uncertainty. They held stillness, hunger, power. I picked up the choker and wrapped it slowly around my neck. The velvet slid into place like it belonged there. When I fastened the clasp and felt the cool metal of the ring rest just above my collarbone, something inside me clicked. I didn't recognize the sound, but I knew its meaning. I had been claimed, yes, but not passively. I had offered myself. I had chosen this. I wore the slip and the choker all morning, padding around the apartment barefoot, sipping tea in silence, running my hands across surfaces without thinking. Everything felt different. The wood floor beneath my feet, the ceramic edge of the mug, the air between my thighs where the fabric barely brushed. My body was no longer just mine. It held echoes of her breath, her pressure, the way she whispered need into my skin with her mouth. I could still feel it in the ache between my legs, in the dull, sweet soreness that came with being known so thoroughly. That evening, I opened the closet and saw something else waiting. An outfit hung neatly, not mine. A floor-length black coat, soft and structured, with nothing beneath it. A pair of heels that didn't belong to me. I didn't ask who had brought them or when. I just knew they were meant for me. I dressed slowly, feeling like I was assembling a version of myself I hadn't yet met. The coat wrapped around my body like a second skin, warm and heavy. I fastened it but didn't tie the belt. The heels clicked softly against the floor as I walked. I didn't need direction. I knew where I was going. The hallway was darker than usual, quiet in that way that buildings get just before night properly falls. Her door was ajar, not wide open, just enough. I slipped inside, and the warmth greeted me instantly. The room was lit again by candles, but this time they were arranged in a circle along the perimeter of the space. The center was bare, except for a single cushioned stool and a length of silk draped across it. She stood near the far wall, back turned, dressed in crimson. Her hair was pinned up, revealing the long line of her neck. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She waited. I walked forward until I reached the edge of the circle, the choker pressing gently against my throat with each breath. I unfastened the coat, letting it slide from my shoulders and fall to the floor. She turned. Her eyes met mine, and everything stopped. My pulse, my breath, time itself. She stepped forward, placed her hand on the silver ring at my throat, and guided me into the circle. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it, the shift, the letting go. That night was slower, stranger, deeper. She bound my wrists gently with the silk, her hands tracing the underside of my arms as if drawing a map. She fed me wine from her fingers, dripped wax onto the insides of my thighs, whispered things into my ear that I barely understood. My body became an altar, my pleasure a ritual. She didn't take me, she received me, again and again, until I was nothing but breath and shiver and surrender, until I forgot who I had been. When she finally laid beside me, her fingers tangled in my hair, her mouth against the top of my spine, she whispered my name like it was something sacred. I didn't cry, but I felt something unravel, some final knot inside me coming loose, and I let it go. The silence was different now, not the hush of hesitation or the quiet that precedes a question, but the deep, settling silence of something concluded, something fully known. The morning light filtered through my blinds in fractured lines, painting my body in slices of gold and shadow. I was lying on my back, one arm thrown over my forehead, my skin still warm from the night before, still slick in places where her mouth had lingered. The sheets were twisted around my legs, my breath slow and even, and yet nothing inside me felt calm. Not exactly. I was aware of every inch of myself in a way that didn't feel like ownership anymore. It felt like consequence. Her absence was deliberate, not cruel, not dismissive, just part of the pattern. She had become something like a pulse, like breath itself, constant, inevitable, even when not immediately present. I didn't need to see her to feel her hand on me. Didn't need to hear her voice to know what it would say. My body remembered every instruction. My mind played the images over and over in my head until they no longer felt like memories, but like something stitched into my skin. I sat up slowly, the choker still around my neck. I hadn't taken it off, not once. It had become part of my reflection, part of the new shape I had grown into without realizing it. When I looked in the mirror now, I didn't see the girl who had hesitated with the ribbon of a box in her hand. I saw someone sharpened by experience, soft in the right places and edged where it counted. Someone claimed, and yet someone still unfolding. When I made my way downstairs later, her door was closed, locked, no flicker of candlelight behind it, no sounds, no trace of movement. For a moment, I stood there barefoot on the cool tile, my fingers brushing the edge of the frame, and I wondered if she had ever really been there at all. The hallway smelled faintly of her, like perfume burned into the paint, but the apartment was quiet, still. The days that followed blurred together. I stopped expecting her, stopped listening for footsteps on the stairs. But that didn't mean I didn't feel her. I still woke up at night with her name in my throat. I still caught myself running fingers over my collarbone as if searching for the press of her lips. I still slept naked, the weight of her absence covering me like another layer of sheets. And then, almost a week later, another package arrived. No name, no label, just a simple brown box with a red ribbon. I took it inside with trembling hands, sat on the floor, and stared at it for a long time before touching it, my breath shallow, my chest tight. I didn't want it to be the end. I didn't want it to be goodbye. I didn't want it to be empty. But it wasn't. Inside the box was a dress. Not lingerie, not silk, a dress. Deep burgundy, long-sleeved, modest but form-fitting, elegant. Beneath it, a sealed envelope. The handwriting was hers, the same elegant curves, the same slant that made even the simplest words feel like secrets. I opened it with the edge of my nail. Inside was a single line. Tonight, upstairs, wear this and nothing else. There was no signature. My body answered before my mind could. I undressed slowly, bathed, dried myself with soft towels, stood naked before the mirror, and let my eyes trace all the ways I had changed. I pulled the dress over my skin. It clung, it concealed, it exposed in the places she had chosen. I didn't wear shoes. I didn't wear makeup. I didn't speak. I climbed the stairs just after midnight. Her apartment door, which had once been so silent, was now cracked open. I stepped inside, and everything had changed. The candles were gone, the heavy scents replaced by something clean, almost sterile. The space felt stripped, minimal. A single chair sat in the middle of the room. She was behind it. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. She gestured, and I moved to stand in front of the chair. I turned slowly, letting her see me from every angle. Her gaze was heavy, clinical. I felt like a canvas, an object, not diminished, refined. She stepped forward, lifted my hair, and unfastened the choker. My breath hitched. The loss of it felt like a cut, like being peeled open. She leaned forward and pressed something cold into my palm. A key. Not to her apartment, not to mine. To the mailbox. To a locked drawer. To something else entirely. She placed it in my hand and stepped back. Then she spoke, finally, and it wasn't what I expected. This is the end of the first part. My lips parted, but I said nothing. I didn't need to. She moved to the window, pulled back the curtain, and for the first time I saw her fully illuminated, not by candlelight, not by fantasy, but by the pale, merciless light of the street lamp outside. She looked older, tired, beautiful, distant. She asked me to leave. Not unkindly, not harshly, just finally. And I did. I walked out barefoot, the dress brushing my thighs, the key clenched in my fist. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't ask why. I went home, undressed, showered again, dried myself slowly. I held the key all night, even in sleep. The next morning, I opened the drawer I had never touched, the one in my own kitchen, the one that had never locked until now, and I found another envelope. This time, the note said nothing, just a photo. Me, taken from behind, kneeling, wearing the choker, the first night. But I hadn't seen a camera. I hadn't seen her take it. And behind the photo, another, me again, but years younger, naked, bound, crying. But it wasn't me, except it was, my face, my body, but not my memory. And suddenly, the key felt heavier. She had known me long before I had known her, long before I had even knocked on her door. And now, I didn't know if I had been chosen or prepared.